All right, my clock reads 7:03. We want to be timely. We are excited that you are here tonight. My name is Lexi McCarthy, and we want to welcome you to Moving Off Campus 101, where we're going to discuss the essentials for navigating an off-campus move. Again, my name is Lexi McCarthy. I'm the Director of Off-Campus and Commuter Services. I use she, her pronouns. I'm excited to welcome my co-host.
And my name is Kelsey Matukis. I'm the Assistant Director for Off-Campus and Commuter Services. I also use she, her pronouns, and I'm so excited that you're all here.
Thanks, Kels. You'll be hearing from both of us throughout the night. We represent the OCCS team, and we are the ones responding in that commuter's email address. If you're a frequent flyer there, we hope you are. So tonight we're going to review the Off-Campus and Commuter Services, or OCCS, goals and mission and the work that we do. We're going to discuss that off-campus housing timeline. It's so critical, and the rights and responsibilities of tenants. We're going to define key lease language. Some of that is really legalistic, so we will review some of that. And we'll end with a review of the steps for finding and securing off-campus housing with some of our best tips and tricks. A couple housekeeping things. We will respond to questions at the end of the session. You can feel free to submit them in the Q&A feature. Be sure to include your email address after your question so we can follow up if your question is not answered live. Finally, this session is being recorded. We will send you the recording as well as the full slide deck tomorrow.
All right, so we are so excited to have you all here tonight. And want to start by telling you a little bit about off-campus and commuter services. So we support our off-campus student population and commuter students by supporting equitable access to both curricular and co-curricular experiences and institutional resources, regardless of a student's place of residence. And we've recently adopted the phrase RAM regardless, which essentially means that no matter if you are living off campus close to the university, if you are commuting from a family unit, or you're commuting from close nearby, you are representing Westchester and you are a Golden Ram, no matter where you are coming from. And especially for our off-campus population, we want to make sure that we encourage and support that you are representing our Westchester University campus, even when you're living off campus. So that's something we want to encourage you to keep in mind when you're thinking about that move off campus. Some opportunities as far as student leadership that we offer and manage in our office. Our commuter assistants are a team of undergraduate commuter students that you see in that lovely picture there that support our first year and transfer student population in their transition to Westchester. And then our Off-Campus and Commuter Association, or OCA, as you'll often hear it called, is our student organization that supports our commuter and off-campus population and advocating for an equitable experience for those students. We manage many programs, some of which you'll see listed here, but including the commuter mentoring program with our commuter assistants, our commuter success day, which we just held in August, community living mediations, and many more. So we're so excited to have you here today and can't wait to talk with you. I also like to start with this statistic. Many of the folks who have attended orientation have heard me say this, but nearly 70% of our Westchester students commute to campus from in and around the borough of Westchester, which really means that even though it feels like sometimes that you are in the minority at Westchester, you're actually in the majority. And again, that you are RAM regardless of where you're living.
Okay, so we always like to start this training out by going over a loose timeline of the typical housing search at Westchester. So it may be hard to believe, but most of our Westchester students who live off campus sign their leases the fall before. So that's October, November for next year, 2023, 2024. Again, we know that this is crazy, but this is just our rental market here in the borough. We'd like to share that although there is the highest demand and inventory in the fall, you can still find housing in the spring often, but it might just not be at the price point or the location that you might be preferring. This specific presentation will focus on the areas of the timeline highlighted in yellow. So right now you're starting your search, you're learning, you're exploring, you're meeting with property owners. Later this fall, we hope that you're exploring units, considering roommates, making those big decisions. And tonight we're going to be talking and offering you some questions to ask on those tours and things to consider when choosing roommates. Finally, this fall, you may be signing a lease. That's for students and those guarantors that are on this call. We will talk about the resources for reviewing leases, talk about some terms, and then some tips for self-advocacy in this process, because there is room to ask good questions and to advocate for resources. Finally, we want to mention that we will be offering additional programming in the spring, and that will be specifically for students to talk about what that transition to off-campus housing might look like. It'll be called Self-Advocating and Transitioning to Life Off-Campus. And that program will specifically discuss the changes that happen between living at home or living in the residence halls to living in our neighborhoods.
So before jumping into some lease language, we just want to go over the set of guidelines and regulations that are given to property owners and tenants, and are really important for our tenants to understand in order to have a positive leasing experience. So some things that our property owners or landlords are responsible for might include keeping the premise in good and safe condition, regularly performing necessary maintenance, and responding to inquiries from our occupants in a timely manner, and regulating conduct of those occupants. As a tenant, you are responsible for compliance with local laws, codes, and ordinances, including any noise ordinances, depositing of all waste in a timely manner and in the right fashion, and overall not intentionally disturbing the peace of the environment or intentionally causing damage to the premises. This is not an exhaustive list by any means, so we encourage you to look at the borough codes of Westchester to really get an idea of that exhaustive list.
So what is a lease? We talk a lot about the word lease in our world, and it's one that you'll constantly hear when you're talking about renting properties. Some of you might have signed leases this year as you're living in university student housing or affiliated. So signing leases might be part of your experience, but hopefully this will be able to provide some additional support for you in signing leases. So what's essential to note is that a lease is a legally binding contract between you and your landlord or property owner outlining rental terms. Leases should always include names, descriptions of properties, rental terms, rent information, including when it's due and how it should be paid. It might be strange to hear that a lot of the rental units here in Westchester still require a check, a paper check. So if you don't have a check or you don't have access to checks, that's something to be thinking about as you're preparing for that move off campus. In a lease, you should also have information about how to get maintenance, repairs, and what utilities are covered with rent and without rent. Sometimes that's a really big determinant in students choosing specific properties over others, indicating what utilities are included in the rent and what are separate expenses in terms of that budgeting. Also in a lease, we hope that you will see a deposit list to include the cost of the security deposit and any additional fees. Sometimes there's an application fee, sometimes there's a parking fees. So want to make sure that you're taking careful note to what you're paying and that there's a record of that. You'll also want to pay special attention to subletting terms, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But you want to make sure that it is allowable. If you feel like there might be an indication that a roommate might not stay the full lease term, or if you perhaps feel like you might be perhaps going abroad and you need to be able to get out of that lease if need be. Finally, you'll want to have information about your property owner's access to the unit once you're moved in. So you want to make sure that the property owner isn't able to stop by any time, but will be able to have access to the unit with so much notice. That's a really important piece to have in your lease. And also, you want to have information in case something is compromised in the unit. What alternative housing would be available to you? So if there's a flood, what would happen? Again, if these things aren't listed, we would encourage you to ask these questions of the property owner. So you might also hear conversations about student zoning laws in Westchester. And there are times that we hear that the students living in houses that are off lease. This is a significant liability for you, your families, your housemates, your property owner, and we really advise against this practice. All students living in a unit should be on the official lease agreement. Just a minute about student-zoned housing. Student-zoned housing are specific houses in the borough of Westchester where more than one student can live. If you're interested in living alone, you can live anywhere in the borough of Westchester. But if you'd like to live with other students, 4 or more students can live in student-zoned housing, and that's where there's a little bit more limited inventory. So again, about the off lease, we encourage your students to be on the lease. Students, we encourage your names to be on the lease. We cannot say that enough. While the landlords or property owners may not care whether you're on the lease or not, we can assure you that the Borough of Westchester does care. And they have been known to evict students who are off lease or living in non-student housing. So that's a really important note that we want to make sure that you're clear on.
All right, so the 4 terms on this slide are really important to understand as you're starting to make those decisions about signing a lease, and are really important for you to understand their meaning and the nuances of this lease language, especially as the property owner that you might be meeting with will be using this kind of language. So to review, a co-signer or a guarantor, which are sometimes used interchangeably, is someone who signs the lease, usually for financial situations, and is liable for the terms on the lease. A security deposit is money unpaid or money paid upon signing the lease, intending to cover any unpaid rent or damage to the unit. So typically this is equal to 1 month's rent and is returned at the end of the lease, minus any unpaid rent or the cost of damage and repairs if there are any. Renter's insurance is something that protects your belongings from loss, theft, and damage, as your property owner's insurance only covers damage to their own property or injuries that occur in that unit. A quick note is that a family member's homeowner insurance will often cover a dependent's apartment. If you have a personal vehicle, you can also get renter's insurance from that same company that provides your car insurance. So just a quick note there. And then a sublease, which Lexi mentioned before, is an agreement between a tenant on the original lease and another person who is not on that original lease, stating that the subleasee will take over the tenant's lease for a specified duration. Just as a note, generally property owners do not have a separate contract with the subleasee. So that's just something to keep in mind.
Okay, so there's, again, I mentioned that there's some legal terms that we will go over, and this is a big one. So it's essential to understand lease responsibility. And there's 2 types of leases that we often see. So there's joint and several liability leases, and then there's individual leases. Joint and several liability is really a confusingly legal term that basically means that all the tenants are on one lease, not separate leases. So each of the tenants on the lease can be held responsible for all, let me say that again, all monetary damages. Individual liability is when each tenant has their own lease for their room and communal spaces. So we know that most of the leases in Westchester are joint and several liability. And so we encourage you to take extra time to choose roommates that are going to be really trustful and are going to be good community members, because so for instance, if one of your housemates decides to move out in the middle of the year without finding a replacement tenant, your landlord will then still require you and your housemates to pay that total rental amount. Likewise, if there's damage to the unit, the landlord can hold all responsible, even if only one of your housemates or their guests caused that damage. So joint and several liability, again, is a term that we see on most leases, but it's important for you to understand the implications and that you can really be sure to trust your roommates, which again, we'll talk about in a little bit.
So we're going to discuss exploring your options. And this is one of the biggest questions that we often get from our students and family members and guests about where should my students start. So these are 3 great options for you to start with. Number 1 is coming up very soon is our off-campus housing fair. That is on Saturday, September 24th. That is during family weekend. If there's any families or guests that are planning to attend, this would be a great place to do that. And it is from 9 a.m. to noon in Sykes Union in the ballrooms. This is a great option for families who might be signing as co-guarantors and would be a really easy way for you to explore those options, talk to some property owners that do have units available for next year. So that's a great option. The other one that is available to students year-round is our off-campus housing website. So this is a website, and the QR code is right there if you would like to scan. Is a free platform for our students to find off-campus housing, search for roommates, and then secure subletting opportunities and also list subletting opportunities. So the listing of rental units on this website is provided exclusively for Westchester University students. The university does not approve, investigate, or endorse any of the listed properties. So for your protection, prospective tenants are really highly advised to acquaint themselves thoroughly with the rental unit before signing anything, any lease agreement. And then lastly, you can always schedule an individual meeting with someone from OCCS, which would be myself or Lexi, to discuss some options in and around the borough, and we'll talk about what your needs are and talk about the something that's not on the slide, but we do often encourage students to check out, and we often mention is the WCU off and on campus housing Facebook group, which is a more informal opportunity for students and families to investigate available properties, maybe find some roommates. So that is an opportunity as well. And Lexi actually just dropped the link to that Facebook group in the chat. It's a public group, so you don't need to join anything extra. So you can just start checking that out as soon as you like.
All right, so thank you, Kelsey. Yes, that Facebook group is a great transition to this slide as we start thinking about roommates, because a lot of our students will post that they're looking for roommates on that Facebook page. But we have some important notes for you as you're making that decision. So first and foremost, we encourage you to spend as much time picking and vetting your roommates as you do selecting your property. While it's exciting to select properties and tour and decide, really deciding who you're living with is what we find is the biggest determinant of success. Not all friends make great roommates, because you need to remember that you're entering a legal and business relationship with these people and expecting them to respect the space and pay their share of the rent on time every month. If you've got a friend who you're not sure will do that and you're signing in that joint and several liability lease, that's really a liability to you and your family. Most problems that we see, and we do see some problems in the off-campus community, are social in nature. So meaning that the roommates have some disagreement about how they choose to live. And we find that those conversations really could have happened before they moved in, before they decide, oh, we want to have parties every weekend, and half the roommates are cool with that and the other half are not cool with that. So again, that's a really important thing to note, that most of those issues really are social in nature. You see some questions to consider on the slide. Again, I'm going to highlight them. Again, it's being confident whether they're able to pay the rent every month. This is something that is sort of a non-negotiable that we hope that you hold yourselves to. Second, is this person someone that you trust not to destroy the property or invite guests who might destroy the property? Is this someone you'll be able to get along with? Again, that getting along is where we often see challenges. And then the shared expectations around cleanliness, noise, conflict resolution, and there's overnight guests. I would say overnight guests are often the biggest challenges that then result in bigger problems later down the line. We do offer off-campus mediation opportunities with our office, but that's really a worst case scenario, because that means that something has broken down in communication. And what we offer as a proactive step is to think about an off-campus roommate agreement. So Kelsey's going to throw that in the chat, but really filling out this agreement with potential roommates or with roommates who you sign the lease with sets the stage. It sets some set of common expectations that's going to help you be successful, and then revisit when things aren't feeling like they're going successfully. So we hope you will use this resource. We are finding that our students who are using this resource are having a more successful rental experience in our borough.
Next up comes touring units. So you can set up these appointments to tour units either directly from the off-campus housing website or directly contacting the property owner individually. So for example, if you were to meet a property owner at our off-campus housing fair and got their information and wanted to set up that way, that is an option to you as well. We highly encourage you to visit the actual unit that you are interested in leasing. Definitely beware of model units that might have features or updates that your actual unit might not have. So for example, you might tour a unit that has beautiful hardwood floors as the model unit, but when you move in, turns out it's all carpet. And that might be something that you care about deeply. So you want to make sure that you're touring the unit that you will actually be leasing. You should also consider talking to current tenants if that's possible, to see if they've had any issues with the unit, any appliances that they might have had issues with, or their experience with the property owner. We highly encourage you to talk about that with the current tenants if at all possible. Finally, we have a touring checklist that you can use by scanning the QR code down here at the bottom to evaluate the location, the layout, the condition, the price, right? You have to think about your needs as a student. If you don't have a car and need to be close to campus, is that something that this unit is offering to you? If there's a certain layout that you need, certain price point that you need, is this unit meeting those conditions? So definitely think about what your needs are and bring that checklist, because that will be really helpful in guiding your tour.
So again, a good transition here as we talk about that tour and the opportunity for self-advocacy. So you've explored your options, you've carefully considered roommates, you've decided on a place to live, and you have that copy of your lease. What we share as university ambassadors is that you should know that these leases are created by property owners and their legal teams to protect their investment and their property. So it's up to you or your families or you together to advocate for yourselves and to make requests that protect your investment, because we know how big this investment is in rent. Particularly in our borough of Westchester. So if you see issues on your tour, you're writing your checklist, you're seeing what's going on, and you're seeing that there's needed upgrades, there's issues, discuss those specific items with your property owner before you sign that lease and put your requests in writing. Again, put your requests in writing. Our legal aid attorney, which Kelsey will talk about in just a minute, always tells our students to document their issues. If there's a documentation, there's a trail, there's more power in that for advocacy. You can also advocate for changes related to rent price, parking, termination clauses, subletting, maintenance, storage, etc. So these are spaces that we've seen students do some negotiating around. I would say in our rental market right now, there's a little bit less room, but I think we've seen some success with students advocating for parking and having some conversations with property owners, particularly for those students who might be out of state and can't get a borough parking pass without a parking spot specifically assigned to them. So we've seen there's been some success there with that self-advocacy. We want to make sure you also read that lease thoroughly to hold your property owner accountable for things that they agree to. So self-advocacy here is not just about changes, but perhaps is related to accountability. And if they're signing this, saying they'll do certain things, i.e. respond to repairs within 24 hours, you want to make sure that you can hold them to that and that you are well aware of your lease terms. You can also ask proactive questions. So as you're touring those units, how would I ensure that I receive my security deposit back at the end of my lease? Maybe you'd ask questions around the neighbors. Have previous tenants had any interactions with the neighbors, good or bad? What happens if our property gets a citation from the borough? Some of our property owners will take those citations and pay them and then bill students. Some will ask the students to take care of that on their own. Again, that's really a case-by-case basis, but it's a good thing to be asking up front so that those things don't become a surprise in the 11th hour. Finally, we always share a quote that says, if you ask for less, you'll get less. But if you ask for more, there's a good chance you might get more.
Finally, we want to make sure that you are aware of our free student legal aid that is available to all enrolled students, again, for free. And so we encourage all students to review the lease with our attorney by scheduling a 15-minute appointment on RAM Connect. Student legal aid is also available for students for other legal issues. So you'll see here that we highlighted the top 3 topic areas in the last few years, but don't feel limited to those areas. Of course, we want you to talk about your lease and your off-campus, any potential issues with our lawyer, but it doesn't have to be just about those. It might include citations that you might receive off campus, landlord-tenant matters, maybe roommate issues, as Lexi mentioned before. But if you are taking some of the steps shared in this presentation, you can safeguard against needing that option. So if you decide not to use our student legal aid for whatever reason, we at least encourage you to share that lease with a family member and to review it together, because they might catch items that you might miss. So we encourage you to review it with someone, if it's not our lawyer, with a trusted individual.
Wonderful, thank you, Kelsey. So as we finish up our spiel of best practices, we want to highlight our steps to success. So first and foremost, exploring those options. If you're available on Saturday the 24th, we'd love to have you 9 to 12. We have our big heavy hitters, if you will. So the biggest, the largest property owner management companies will be in attendance. And they're a great resource to begin asking some of these questions we've talked about. I know we have a question in the Q&A about the link to our off-campus housing website. Kelsey can throw that in the chat right now so you have it. There are properties being added almost daily for next year. I know that there's some folks probably on this call that are having challenges this year, but so that you know, we are seeing the properties being added for next year already almost daily. Facebook is also showing that population increasing. Second is selecting those roommates. So carefully selecting roommates who have similar values and having those discussions about how you intend to live and to thrive in the borough. Third is really touring those properties. Remember, touring the actual unit. During 2020, 2021, we saw a lot of virtual tours. We're really advising against those things because we saw our students really get burned. And to be frank, we don't want to see that happen again. And the property owners can tour you through their actual properties if they're charging the amount they're charging for rent. So tour those actual properties, tour those actual units. You have time. You are all ahead of the game here being on this call on September 14th. So make sure you tour those actual units. And also self-advocate. So advocate for what you deserve. We know that you're making a big investment here and you should be confident to ask the questions for what you need to have a positive experience. And finally, don't be a stranger. We hope you take advantage of our student legal aid. We are really pushing this year. This is a free service, an absolutely free service for students to use. 15-minute consultations with a lawyer who is excellent and understanding and warm, and they're confidential. So again, unfortunately, our parents and families can't use this service, but our students can, and we're seeing them using her at a really high rate this year. So we're hopeful that students are doing more of that advocacy and thinking ahead in their off-campus journey. So as we head on to our final slide, we want to thank you for being here this evening. We hope you feel better prepared to navigate this moving process and better understand your resources. As we said, you'll be sent the recording of this session. All that are here in attendance, we have your email address. We will send both the slide deck and also our recording. If you are a student that's here, this program, Moving Off Campus 101, can be included on your RAM plan or your co-curricular transcript. You can scan this QR code and you can complete the assessment, which then allows us to understand what you've learned and then add this to your RAM plan. So this is a easy way to get something on your RAM plan early in the semester. I'm going to pop that in the chat when we keep continuing, starting if you have any trouble with the QR code. But we'll open up now for questions. So please feel free to throw some questions in the Q&A. We will do our best to answer them. I can assure you that we've heard a lot of questions and